Guys, I'm here with Congressman Eric Burleson from the great state of Missouri. And he, along with some other congresspersons in DC, have put forth a bill that not a whole lot of us were expecting, at least not right out of the gate. But nevertheless, it's here. And it's something that's encouraging to a lot of us. And we have a lot of questions regarding that. And that's why the congressman is here with me today to answer some of those questions. But it is the Abolish the ATF bill. I know you're chomping at the bit to hear a little bit more information about this. So, Congressman, can you tell us a little bit about why this bill was important to you to put up and a little bit more of the details about it? And I know it's not going to be totally involved, but just give us the gist of what your thought process was in putting this bill out.
Well, great to be on. And I'll say first and foremost, like my district, when I talk to constituents in the district, the one agency they probably hate the most is the ATF. So, there's, if for good reasons, this is a disaster agency. They have, they try to impose their unconstitutional anti-Second Amendment new rules on the American people time and time again. From the, recently the pistol brace rule, the ATF is, changed their mind on, made tens of millions of American citizens potential felons, in one stroke of a pen. This is an agency that tends to botch everything that they do. They mess up. Look at what happened at Ruby Ridge, right? Where they entrapped a good individual and then went in and raided his property, murdering half of his family and I think a friend, right?
Yep.
It was a total disaster and an embarrassment to the United States government. And then you had the events of Waco, where the ATF totally screwed that entire event up. And then the FBI had to come in the FBI had to come in and clean up what the ATF did in both Ruby Ridge and at Waco. And then you have the Fast and Furious events where they basically armed the Mexican drug cartels because they were so dumb and naive, thinking that they could track these firearms. And then just recently in my neighboring state of Arkansas, you have that tragic event where because their new rule about declaring anybody that is purchasing too many firearms as a gun dealer, that they went in and raided the home of an upstanding individual in Arkansas who was I think the administrator of one of the local airports, stand-up community individual. They went in and shot him and murdered him.
Yeah.
And so this is not an agency that is out for defending our constitutional rights. It's not an agency that's about keeping Americans safe. It's an agency that's all about making it difficult to be a law-abiding, owner of a firearm in America. And so that's why this agency just needs to go. I also think that they're a duplicative agency. So they overlap in so many ways with other agencies on the federal level, and they overlap with all of our local law enforcement on the state level. So when you've got, the ATF going into my state of Missouri and then commandeering my sheriff, who my taxpayers and myself pay to keep me safe and keep criminals off the streets, but instead now they're going to commandeer him to go round up bump stocks or go to gun shows and arrest, people who are hobbyist gun collectors. It's just absurd. It's not about keeping Americans safe. They're commandeering our local law enforcement, making us less safe by focusing on their stupid, unconstitutional gun grabs.
I'd also like to point out regarding the Waco and Ruby Ridge, they also awarded themselves trophies and plaques and awards for those particular issues. So that's the tone deafness of this unelected bureaucracy. Also, they can't read the room. They don't realize that this is not something you should be patting yourself on the back with, and certainly not publicly where other Americans can see that you're rewarding yourself for what you did to other Americans that had done not enough to be murdered and have your place burnt to the ground either. And I would also like to point out on the Malinowski thing. I know that, we have to crawl before we can walk, but that would be something that personally I would like to see you guys at some point open an investigation, because the way that took place, the way it went down, it seemed like more of an entrapment issue. I don't know how involved you got into the topic, but it was there was no reason this man should have been murdered in his own living room, with right next to his wife, who had to watch him die. That's something that
Right.
I think that there was way too much that was let go too quickly, including in the state of Arkansas. I know that's, you guys have no
Yeah.
control over that, but the state of Arkansas let this investigation go right away by saying, "Oh, the FBI and ATF assumed they did, or came to the conclusion they did nothing wrong." And I feel like we shouldn't be closing the book on that issue. That's when I read your headline about abolishing the ATF, and I mean this, Congressman. First thing I thought of, the ATF is a safety issue. I understand all the things you're talking about, the overreach and the things like that. Obviously, we all realize that. But I think that there's a lot of innocent Americans that are at a safety risk for the same thing that happened to Malinowski. That is a big deal. I mean, we hear the gun grabbers on the left all the time talking about, well, if we just save one life, that was one right there. That,
Yeah.
there was a lot of things that happened that were wrong and that took place there that were covered up. And I feel like that more investigation needs to take place, and somebody needs to be held account for that, because that was a murder, in my opinion.
It's tragic. I mean, the question is, I think they need to, this agency, if it's not going to be abolished, they need to at least take a step back and ask the question, what are we trying to accomplish here, right? We're going to go in and raid the home of somebody because we want to enforce this new rule about, about gun, this new gun dealer rule. That it's just absolutely absurd. And the outcome is horrific. So I think that something has to happen, and I think that at the end of the day, if this agency were eliminated, I don't think anybody would notice anything. I think if anything, a lot of these events would go away, and you would, people would have their gun laws regulated on the local level and the state level, which is where people have a bigger say.
Well, and I think that the other thing that is a little bit worrisome to me is that you see mom and pops who have done something as simple as not crossing a T or dotting an I that have been put out of business over the last 4 years. I mean,
That's right.
they brag about how many ATF, they call them rogue ATF agencies, which I think that's wrong to do that to. There should be some kind of a slander issue involved there when you say, oh, we put this many rogue agencies out. If you go back and investigate, they are not rogue agencies. There's clerical issues and errors that were made on paperwork, and they use that as an opportunity with their no tolerance policy to put these people out of business.
They do. I know, for example, a really great business in Missouri that was closed down because they did an entrapment. They went in and they posed as a husband and wife, and because the person didn't check and make sure that the last name was the same or that they were actually married, they ended up arresting this individual and closing down their business for selling, a firearm, and letting the husband put down the credit card, and the wife filled out the form. It was a purchase for her, but yet that's a clerical issue. That is not about keeping people safe. This is about just trying to shut down businesses and trying to entrap people. And so that's why this agency it's a pathetic, it's in its attempt to try to keep Americans safe, and they violate the Second Amendment every time.
Well, and I'm sure those agents that entrapped that couple, their lives were in danger. Of course, you'll hear that. Hear that from the White House. I'm sure they put the same amount of effort into going to, speaking of Missouri, in St. Louis, and going down there and chasing down these Glock switches that are shooting people in downtown at 2 a.m. By the tennis courts. I'm sure they're putting the same amount of effort into entrapping those people, right?
Yeah, and that's a good point. Is that at the end of the day, why are we focused on all of these, chasing down people that are just trying to be law-abiding gun owners, when we have real criminals out there who are committing violent acts and crimes, and we don't even apparently have enough law enforcement to arrest them. We release them. We don't incarcerate them, and so this whole system is completely upside down. And when the American people see a justice system that is not keeping them safe and letting criminals run free, then yeah, you bet we need Americans recognize that I should own a firearm. I can't count on the law enforcement to keep me safe. I've got to keep myself safe. And then you got an ATF who's counterbalancing that, trying to make it difficult for a law-abiding citizen, the whole system just needs to be changed.
Well, and speaking of changing, a lot of conversation that we've had in the gun community over the last couple of years in talking about abolishing the ATF is not that we think that they do anything productive, but they do stuff. What happens with those responsibilities and the things that they think they're doing to protect the American people? Because that's what they say all the time, we're protecting the American people. What happens to those responsibilities in the event that, let's say, you're successful in abolishing the ATF, and kudos for you if that happens? Where do those responsibilities go? In other words, like when we, let's say we do whatever we do overseas and there's a power vacuum in a country because we pulled out terrorists or whatever.
Mhm.
I liken this the same way, that now you have a group of responsibilities that somebody in DC is going to assume needs to continue. Have you guys thought that through on who assumes those responsibilities and what happens with those things?
Yeah, personally, I think that we need to leave much of it to the states. We need to let the states decide how to regulate the firearm laws, how to keep their citizens safe. They're closer to the people, and I think they know what works and what doesn't. So I don't think the federal government even really has a constitutional authority to regulate firearms. I think
Right.
the National Firearms Act, I think, is unconstitutional, the entire act, which is why
Sure.
one of my other bills is to eliminate the National Firearms Act. So I want to return all of that authority back to the states, to local lawmakers, and let it be, let the enforcement of that be done by local law enforcement.
And the beauty of that, just for the viewers out there to understand this, those that may be thinking, well, they just developed their own set of rules now to infringe upon the Second Amendment. That's not possible because of the Second Amendment being a federal law that's in place. The states can't supersede that. So even if any responsibility and authority got pushed back to the states, they can't infringe on the Second Amendment.
That's right. They can only go so far. They can't. There's a lot of things that they cannot do. Thank God, because of the Second Amendment.
Now, one of the things that you're probably going to hear, and I'm at some point you'll get pushback if you haven't already, is the tracing process of the ATF. And I do want to point that out because people are going to hear that like this is some miraculous thing that the ATF does that's saving lives. Yay, we're tracing guns. I've said this often, and I want to make sure that we understand this. The tracing process is an afterthought. Who cares where the gun came from after the crime has been committed? I never understood them patting themselves on the back of tracing a gun, and 9 times out of 10 they trace it back to, oh, it was stolen from somebody who bought it legally. Well, great. What did we accomplish by spending these millions of dollars in a tracing program that has all this technology built into it just to find out that the person that we knew was a criminal because they shot somebody actually stole the gun too? What did we solve by that? So that's something I think you're going to get pushback on, but I think we need to be able to fight back with that and say it's a useless program.
That's a good point. I'll keep that in mind. I think that's a great response to that.
I'm curious. Let's talk about gun control. I know you have another bill that you presented also.
So I think that this National Firearms Act is not about keeping Americans safe. It's about making owning a firearm more complicated and paying more taxes to own the firearm that you want. So, for example, I would ask the question, to a liberal gun hater, which is more lethal, a pistol or a rifle? Like it doesn't change, and yet we have different regulations about the length of the barrel and different classifications. And then if and that's why the whole thing is complicated to most citizens. And then the fact that we want to charge extra money, so you can have to get a federal stamp just because your rifle is too short, or your pistol is too long, or you have a pistol brace on it. That's absurd. It's not about keeping people safe. It's about making it more difficult and onerous to own a firearm. The other thing is, why are we going to make it to where you cannot have a suppressor on a firearm? It's just about making it, the loud and painful to fire a firearm. Like,
right.
I think that anybody that understands how a suppressor works knows that it's not like it is in the movies. It's not, silent.
Right.
And so I think that the whole thing just needs to go away. And it's at the end of the day, it's just about a process of making it more difficult to own a firearm, not about keeping firearms out of the hands of criminals.
And I think the statistics and facts obviously back you up on that too, because um, it is relatively easy to get your suppressor now, especially now. Suppressors have become a lot easier. You don't see a spike in them being used in crimes.
But
In fact,
but it shouldn't be taxed at the level that it is. Even if the paperwork process is easy, why are we still making people go through this?
right. Well,
Right?
I look at it this way. You fill out paperwork to purchase a firearm. If you really feel like there needs to be some kind of traceable mechanism, then not saying I support this, why don't we just have a 4473 for a suppressor? That, there shouldn't be any additional money tied to it. But personally, I don't think a suppressor is any different than putting an optic on your firearm. They're not used in crimes overwhelmingly.
Yes,
And
I
same goes for
100%
pistols. I
agree.
mean, if you look at the statistics, the FBI statistics, overwhelmingly handguns are what's used in crimes. It's not rifles, long guns, short barrel rifles, or anything like that. The NFA is serving no purpose right now other than to collect money.
That's exactly why I'm trying to get rid of the NFA.
I love it. So let's talk about, I know you have some co-sponsors out there. I'm pretty excited to see that you do have some co-sponsors getting behind this. Let's talk a little bit about them and the kind of support that you're receiving on this bill.
Yeah, we have a great Second Amendment caucus here. I think the chairman of that is Thomas Massey. And I believe that he was a co-sponsor last year. He will likely be a co-sponsor this year. Lauren Boebert is our first co-sponsor. So we've got quite, and there's a lot more that I cannot recall, but we will continue to grow that co-sponsor list as time goes on. The fact that I didn't want to wait in filing. I didn't want to wait and collect a ton of co-sponsors before I filed this. I just wanted to get it filed. And we'll collect more co-sponsors as the year goes on.
I know we're going to get pushback, but what kind of pushback are you expecting, and have you received any yet on this?
From my district, none. I think my district knows that I support the Second Amendment. I mean, I was in Missouri before I got up here. I passed constitutional carry. I overrode a governor's veto to get that done. I passed stand your ground law in Missouri. I passed Castle Doctrine. And then I passed the Second Amendment Preservation Act. So no one is surprised where I come from in my district. They may not agree with me, but they should not be surprised at this. And so I continue, and I thank God for my district. They back me up on these issues, and I feel like they've got my back on this. And so I think even people that differ with me know that they're not going to change my mind. So I honestly haven't had anybody push back on me up here or from my district.
And I can vouch for you too, because I know that when you and I originally met, it was 4 or 5 years ago when you were a state senator, I believe, at the time. And I can tell the viewers out there that you certainly walk the walk and talk the talk, because this has been in your DNA since I've known you for 5 years. And, I was excited to see your name on this, but I was not the least bit surprised to see your name on this.
Yeah, thank you. It's just, look, I believe in this country. I believe in the rights and the freedoms that we have, that they came from God. They didn't come from government. And it's something very precious. It's probably the most precious country in the history of the world, and the framework that we have. And we have to do everything we can to keep the rights that we've been given. And so that's why I'm doing this. A lot of people run for office because they like the title. They like the go into the fancy parties and things like that. That's not me. I'm here because I want to save this country, and so that's why I do what I do.
Well said. Well, I'm hoping this is not another one of those bills that's out there just for some window dressing, where people get a little bit of clout in the Second Amendment community. I hope that's not the case. I know that's not in your case, but I'm hoping that we don't get co-sponsors that assume this is a doom bill and they just want to get on to get a little bit of clout with their constituents.
Yeah, let me speak to that a little bit. So whenever I started as a freshman in the Missouri House, I tried to file constitutional carry, and I was told by even Second Amendment groups, they said, "Oh, you're crazy. You can't get that done." But you know what? I did it anyway. I filed the bill, and then I pushed the bill to a committee, right? And then once I had a committee hearing, people heard the issue and they said, that's not such a radical idea, right? and I was able to get it to the floor the next year. But after 8 years, we were able to move the Overton window and change the dialogue on that topic and eventually pass constitutional carry and then override the governor, meaning we had 2/3 of the House and the Senate override the governor to support something that 8 years before was considered a radical idea that had no chance of passing. So I say that to say this. I understand that this may not happen this year. It may not happen for the next 5 years, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. And it doesn't mean that we can't have this conversation and that we need to move the ball in that direction. And we need to move the Overton window so that the dialogue is being had, that the ATF is a ridiculous agency. It's duplicative. That's not serving the people. We need to have that conversation. We need to have the conversation that the National Firearms Act isn't serving the interests of the American people and keeping them safe. And then the more that we have these conversations, the better chances we have of actually achieving our goal.
Well said. And my last question to you would be, and it's just out of curiosity, I know that Trump has not come into office yet, but have you gotten any feedback or response from the incoming Trump organization in any kind of way?
I'm going to meet with Trump this weekend. I don't know if this topic is going to come up. But I do know that like JD Vance has come out publicly in support of abolishing the ATF. So at least we've got some people within the Trump administration that are on board with this. So, but again, I think that we're going to have to continue to have the dialogue and start the conversation. I hope that your listeners start talking about it. The better, more people chatter about it and ask their member of Congress, are you a co-sponsor of this bill? And if you're not, why not?
Right.
The more momentum we can get it behind it, the better.
Well, I'm an hour away from Clay Higgins, and I will actually text him this interview whenever we're done with it, and it's out there, and ask him to take a look at it. But I have total confidence.
You're a lucky American. Yes. Clay Higgins is one of the best of us in Congress. Yep. He's my hero up here. There's times where I want to channel my inner Clay Higgins.
Right. Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind he will get behind this bill. So I'm excited about that. He's certainly he's a good American. I can tell you this, just in closing. I remember whenever the Safer Communities Act was passed, and I actually have a video out on this with Clay's permission. He called me when he landed in Lafayette to go home from Washington, D.C. And he called me and we had a long conversation on the phone. And it got to a point where we were talking kind of like you and I are talking. And I said, do you mind if I record this? Because I said, this was a true American conversation. This man, and I don't want to make this sound like I'm disparaging him. This is a compliment to his love of this country. This man cried on the phone, expressing his love of this country to me. And that I was like, I was not expecting that. And that, again, he gave me permission to share that video. He said, absolutely. He said, I love my country. There's very few people that I've met that I feel like have a true love for this country, unlike Clay. He's amazing when it comes to that.
I couldn't agree more. He's one of the best amongst us, if not the best. His character is without a reproach. I mean, he's courageous as well. Like you're not going to intimidate Clay Higgins, and that he's going to do the right thing every time.
Right. Well, congratulations on this bill. I think it's great. I know that we have to start somewhere, right? So this is a great starting point. And if nothing else, we start putting it in people's ear. I've told people all the time, don't get discouraged. And I'm not trying to tank your bill, but don't get discouraged if it doesn't pass the first time it's presented. I think in a lot of cases, when we put these bills up, if nothing else, it has people start that conversation like you were mentioning earlier. And if we can get more people to talk about it, and not just talk about it, I know that when you reach the opposition, and sometimes the opposition is on our side because they don't understand the process and they don't understand what goes away or the unnecessary things that these guys do. I think once we start having those conversations and we get that information out there, more people are going to realize the ATF doesn't serve a purpose.
That's right. We need to change the debate. And by having this bill and others like it, we're having a debate about things that we want to have a debate about instead of things like, oh, should we have red flag laws in place, right? So I want to have this debate. I'm going to bring the battle here and have the battle on these topics. That's how you win.
Well, and you're bringing it on your condition. You're being offensive instead of us continuously being defensive when it comes to gun rights. I like to see somebody pushing in that direction to gain those rights back instead of always negotiating, giving some of them up. So I kudos to you for doing that.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Congressman. Look, tell your staff any information that comes out on this, send it my way. You've got my email, my telephone number. I'm happy to pass on any information you guys want us to disseminate. We just want to get the word out there and have people talking about this everywhere. So I'm happy to take anything that your staff wants to send our way.
Absolutely. We will. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't understand the point that you're making.
God save the Queen, man.
I'm sorry, I thought this was America. It's over.